At my son's company award ceremony. I found my name tag sitting neatly on the reception table. But instead of Margaret Bell, or even Jonathan's mother, it read in gold script, "The Old Parasite." I stared at it for a long moment, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks. Maybe I'd grabbed someone else's by mistake. But no, there it was, clipped to a place card, right next to a seat labeled, VIP guests. Mine was the only one with a joke. A cruel joke. My daughter-in-law, Madison, stood just a few feet away, chatting and laughing with a group of sharply dressed colleagues. Her glance flicked toward me for half a second, and I saw it, the smirk. Quick, controlled, but there. I just smiled and walked in. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and let me know which city you're watching from. It means more than you know. This ceremony was supposed to be a celebration, a symbol of legacy. My son, Jonathan, was being honored as one of the most influential business owners in the state. The event was held at the Grand Oak Banquet Hall, chandeliers dripping crystals, linen-draped tables, everyone dressed in their finest. I wore the navy blue dress I'd saved for special occasions. I'd even gone to the salon for a blowout and borrowed a string of pearls from my neighbor Beverly, who insisted I looked regal. But now, that name tag felt heavier than the pearls around my neck. I pinned it to my dress anyway. The young woman working the guest table gave me a puzzled look. Is everything okay with your tag? I nodded. Everything's just fine, dear. My voice didn't crack. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. Inside the ballroom, the room buzzed with clinking glasses and careful networking. I walked past tables of people who all seemed to know each other. No one waved me over. No one asked me to sit. I found my place, the back left corner, next to the emergency exit, behind one of the pillars. As I sat, I heard it, not loud, but enough. Did you see what her name tag says? A woman whispered. Her voice laced with amusement. Madison's idea. Someone else snorted. She told me last week. Thought it would be hilarious. She calls her, the pension drain. Can you imagine? The laughter that followed was stifled but sharp, like the pop of a champagne cork in a dead silent room. I took a sip of water and folded my hands on my lap. I've always believed in composure, in not making a scene. But inside, my chest tightened like a fist. Madison swept past me, her sequined gown shimmering in the warm light. Oh, Margaret, she chirped with mock cheer. So glad you made it. The press is just loving tonight. I smiled. You've done a beautiful job with the decor. She winked. Credit goes to the budget, thanks to the early investors. And, the silent ones. Another glance at my name tag. I smiled again, tighter this time. Jonathan took the stage 20 minutes later. He looked handsome, tall, confident, a mirror of his father in his prime. He thanked his wife first, then his team, then his investors. Not a single mention of me, not even when talking about the early years. The tough ones, when we mortgaged the house so he could launch his first product. Madison clapped the loudest. I sat through the speech, through the standing ovation, through the camera flashes and champagne toasts. I didn't cry, I didn't speak. But I did look at that name tag, now slightly wrinkled from wear, and thought, you think I'm the parasite? You have no idea who built the host. And I promise you, by the end of this story, you will. After the speeches ended, I sat quietly at my assigned table while guests mingled and moved to the cocktail area. The applause had faded, but the sting of being erased still rang in my ears. I glanced down at the tablecloth, crisp white linen, perfectly pressed, and realized I'd been tracing circles on it with my index finger for minutes. An old habit I hadn't noticed in years. Usually, Jonathan would tease me about it, but he hadn't looked my way once. Madison passed by again, this time arm in arm with one of the board members. We're thinking of opening a second location next year, she said brightly. Of course, John and I will have to discuss funding strategies. The man nodded with admiration. Smart couple, you two have built something impressive. I caught Madison's eye briefly. She didn't flinch, just kept walking. I used to believe that the hardest part of aging was physical, the aching knees, the blurred vision, but no, the hardest part is realizing the people you once carried now step over you like furniture. A waiter stopped by with hors d'oeuvres. Would you like a shrimp puff, ma'am? I almost said no, but then I thought, I paid for this event, didn't I? 2. Please, I said, meeting his eyes. He smiled politely and handed me the plate. I chewed slowly, listening to the buzz of conversations that didn't include me. The taste was fine, fancy, overpriced, just like everything Madison touches. Across the room, Jonathan was deep in conversation with 2 tech investors. He gestured with confidence, laughed at just the right moment, shook hands like a man born to win. I remembered the first time he gave a public speech. His tie was crooked, and he clutched my hand backstage so tightly I lost feeling in my fingers. Don't leave until I'm done. Mom, he'd whispered, I need to see your face. Now, I was invisible in a room I'd paid to decorate. I took another sip of water and let my gaze drift to the stage. The podium still had the Beltec logo on it, a name we created together one late night over pizza. When we couldn't afford to turn on the heat. He was just 26 then. I was still working part-time at the library to make ends meet. Every spare dollar went into that first office, a shared space above a laundromat that reeked of detergent and ambition. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I believed in him. But tonight made one thing painfully clear. Madison had rewritten the story. And in her version, I was a relic, an afterthought, a burden dressed in navy blue pearls. I placed the shrimp puff back on the plate, lost my appetite. Then, from behind me, a voice, warm, familiar, interrupted my thoughts. Margaret Bell, as I live and breathe. I turned, and for the first time that night, I smiled without forcing it. Margaret Bell, as I live and breathe. I turned and saw a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a kind smile. Martin Reynolds, my late husband's old friend, and more importantly, his attorney. He looked oddly out of place among the sea of tech bros and designer gowns. But I was never happier to see a familiar face. Martin, I said, my voice catching slightly. It's been years. Too many, he said, pulling out the chair beside me without asking. But I've been keeping tabs. Jonathan's come a long way. I nodded. He has. Tonight's quite the production. Martin glanced at my name tag, still pinned awkwardly to my dress. His jaw tightened. I see Madison's unique sense of humor hasn't improved. I didn't respond, just traced another slow circle on the tablecloth. He leaned in. Look, I wasn't sure whether I should bring this up, but seeing you sitting here like this, I think it's time. I turned to face him, a little wary. Bring what up? He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and slid a small envelope across the table. Not flashy, just cream cardstock with my name in his familiar handwriting. I hadn't seen that script since Robert's funeral. I was instructed to give this to you only if certain conditions were met. Conditions? Martin hesitated, then nodded toward Madison. Humiliation, disrespect. Robert predicted she'd try something like this eventually. He hoped he was wrong. I stared at the envelope. It felt heavier than it looked. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I asked, why not tell me sooner? Robert didn't want to burden you. Martin said gently. He thought if you were treated well, there'd be no need. He wanted love, not leverage, to be the glue of your family. I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not heartbreak. Clarity. The room didn't feel quite so suffocating anymore. The music played on, the guests kept laughing, but now, I wasn't just the woman behind the scenes. I was holding a thread that could unravel everything. Martin stood. I'll leave you to read that in peace. Just know, whatever you choose to do with what's inside, I've got your back. I nodded, thanking him with just a look. As he walked away, I slipped the envelope into my purse without opening it. Not yet. Let them toast a little longer. Let Madison think she'd won. Let Jonathan keep spinning his story. There would be time. But not tonight. Tonight, I would sit quietly. And remember what it felt like to be underestimated. Because nothing sharpens resolve like being erased, publicly, deliberately, and by your own blood. After Martin left, I remained seated for a long time, blending into the wallpaper of the event I helped pay for. No one came over. No one noticed me missing from the photos. Even when the servers began clearing the plates and folding chairs clinked across the floor. I sat still. Invisibility, I was learning, had its advantages. From my seat in the corner, I watched Jonathan shake hands with donors, pat backs, pose for pictures. Madison flitted beside him, correcting his tie, whispering into his ear, nodding at all the right times. She looked the part of a power wife. But I remembered the first time I met her, nervous smile, cheap heels, and a firm grip on her latte. She said she admired women like me, who raised sons like Jonathan. That admiration had a short shelf life. I reached into my purse and touched the envelope again. Still unopened, still heavy with everything unsaid. But before I could pull it out, a memory rose, uninvited but sharp. Jonathan was 7. We were in the garage, sorting through old boxes after his father had made us downsize. I'd cut my hand on a broken snow globe, and he'd rushed to get a band-aid from his backpack. "You always fix things," he'd said, pressing the bandage on with tiny fingers. "Now I'll fix you." That boy would never have let me wear this name tag. That boy believed I was indestructible. Somewhere along the way, that version of me became inconvenient. Madison didn't erase me by accident. She did it systematically, reducing me to polite nods, strategic silence, and yes, tonight, a punchline in gold calligraphy. But the part that hurt most wasn't her. It was him. Jonathan had seen the tag. I know he did. His eyes paused for half a beat too long when we made eye contact. But he looked away, and said nothing. That kind of silence says everything. They wanted to write me out quietly, elegantly. No fights, no scenes, just a slow fade into irrelevance, with a name tag to seal the deal. I adjusted my shawl, stood up, and walked toward the exit without looking back. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. At the coat check, the young man handed me my wrap with a smile. "Hope you had a nice evening, ma'am." I nodded. It was illuminating. Outside, the air was crisp, the kind that wakes you up no matter how tired you are. I slipped into the back of the car I'd ordered and pulled the door shut. Only then, with the city lights flickering past the window, did I finally open the envelope. And as I began to read, I realized something that made me sit a little taller. They hadn't erased me. They'd reminded me who I used to be. The envelope contained 3 pages. Typed, signed at the bottom in Robert's careful cursive, a style that had always reminded me of architecture. Structured and sure. It wasn't a will. Not exactly. That had already been read after his passing. This was something else. A personal clause. A protection. A warning. He'd written it the year before his health began to fade. Filed it privately with Martin, and instructed that I only see it if, in his words, Margaret is ever publicly humiliated by members of this family. Particularly those who benefit from her kindness. My hands didn't tremble as I read. In fact, they felt steadier than they had all night. The document detailed something I didn't know, that Robert had quietly placed certain voting shares of Beltec in my name during the company's expansion. Not just ceremonial shares, not just honorary status, real power, silent, until triggered. And the trigger? Public disrespect with intent to diminish her standing or erase her contribution. He was a man of few words, but when he chose them, they carried weight. I stared at the last line. Printed in bold. "You are not invisible. You are the cornerstone." The car rolled to a stop in front of my home. I tucked the papers back into the envelope, slid them into my desk drawer, and made tea, chamomile, not because I needed calming, but because the routine grounded me. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once helped Jonathan with algebra. Iced Madison's wedding cupcakes, and signed my own mortgage refinance to fund his second business loan. The same table where, in quieter years, I'd sat across from Robert while he drafted contracts with a fountain pen and sipped black coffee. Now, it was just me and this letter. But I wasn't alone in the way they'd hoped. Not discarded, not defeated. I was armed with truth, with leverage, with time. I didn't need to confront Madison in a ballroom. I didn't need to shout or demand apologies. No, what I needed was patience. Because the best moves are made in silence. 2 days after the award ceremony, I called Martin. No small talk, just, "It's time." He didn't ask for clarification. "I'll prepare the documents," he said. We met in his office the next morning, polished wood, quiet lighting, the kind of place where people speak in measured tones and nothing ever feels rushed. He slid a folder toward me and tapped the signature line. This will trigger a mandatory shareholder review. You'll remain silent until the audit completes. No public statements. Let them come to you. I nodded and signed. It wasn't vengeance I felt. It was precision, like finally aligning a crooked frame on the wall that had been tilted for years. By Thursday, the audit was underway. By Monday, Madison called. I let it rain. By Wednesday, she showed up at my door. I watched from the upstairs window as she stood on the porch. Perfectly dressed, holding a tray of lemon bars, the kind she knew I liked. She knocked 3 times, then stepped back and looked around, like she wasn't sure what kind of Margaret would answer. But I didn't answer. I watched her leave. The next day, Jonathan called. This time, I picked up. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked. His voice sharp around the edges. "Why is Martin freezing accounts? Why are there people combing through company records?" I said nothing at first. Just let the silence fill the space. He continued, softer now. "Madison's upset. She says you're retaliating. That this is about the ceremony." "No," I said calmly. "This is about the truth. And about knowing when to stop being quiet." He didn't speak. So I did. "I spent years helping build something, with your father. And with you. And I let you take the credit. I let Madison rewrite me as a footnote. But when she labeled me a parasite, publicly, that was the moment I remembered who I am." He exhaled. "It was a joke." "No," I interrupted. "It was a message. One I heard loud and clear. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just told the truth. Plainly. And then I hung up. Not because I was angry. But because the conversation was over." That evening, I received an email, not from Jonathan. Not from Madison. But from Beltec's legal team. Requesting a meeting, to discuss board representation and next steps regarding the review process. For the first time in years, I slept with the window open. The night air was cold. But I didn't mind. Let them wonder what I'll do next. Let them remember. I wasn't just the wife. Or the mother. Or the old woman at the table. I was the cornerstone. And I was done being quiet. The boardroom felt colder than I remembered. Or maybe it was just me. I arrived 5 minutes early. Madison was already seated, tailored blazer. Glossy hair. That same polished look she wore like armor. Jonathan came in seconds later. Flanked by 2 junior partners. He didn't look at me. I didn't mind. The Beltec conference room hadn't changed much in the last few years. Same glass walls. Same oak table. I used to clean those floors when we couldn't afford janitorial staff. I once held Jonathan in that corner chair while he cried over his first failed prototype. They'd forgotten that. The legal team opened with pleasantries. Then a summary of the audit findings. Several expenditures had been flagged, personal expenses disguised as business write-offs. Unexplained travel charges. A bonus package approved without full board consent. Madison shifted in her seat. I said nothing. Then came the discussion about representation. As the majority silent shareholder, the lead attorney said, nodding toward me, "Mrs. Bell has the right to request a seat at the board. Or to appoint a proxy." Madison interrupted, voice too bright. "With all due respect, Margaret has never been involved in the operational side. I think it's best if we maintain current leadership. For continuity." I looked at her, calm, direct. "You mean it's best if I remain quiet? For your comfort?" She blinked. I continued, "Robert didn't leave me these shares to decorate a portfolio. He left them because he knew what it meant to build something from scratch. And what it meant to be erased." Jonathan finally spoke. "Mom, is this really necessary?" I turned to him. "When you were 15, you broke your arm skateboarding off the garage roof. Madison doesn't know that story. When you were 26 and bankrupt, you slept in my guest room for 6 months. She doesn't know that either. But I do. Because I was there. Every version of you, I've seen it. And I stayed." He looked down. I didn't need tears. I didn't need apologies. I needed them to remember. "I'm not asking for control," I said quietly. "I'm reclaiming presence." The room went still. I reached into my bag. Pulled out a signed document, my proxy appointment. A woman named Elena Cho. CFO. Clean record. Ruthless with numbers. Allergic to flattery. I won't attend meetings, but Elena will, and she won't miss a thing. I stood up. Meeting adjourned. I walked out, not because I'd won, but because I'd been counted. And for women like me, that's the most dangerous thing of all. A month passed. Elena attended her first board meeting. By the end of it, 3 financial restructurings were paused, 1 internal audit reopened, and 2 executive bonuses delayed pending review. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile unnecessarily. She just asked questions, the kind Madison never expected to answer. Jonathan stayed mostly quiet. The fallout didn't happen overnight. It never does. But slowly, emails began to copy me. Legal updates included me. Quiet nods in hallways returned. My name no longer whispered with discomfort, it carried weight again. Not because I demanded it, but because they finally remembered what I carried. I didn't show up at the office. Didn't hover or gloat. I didn't need to. My silence was no longer mistaken for weakness. Madison stopped calling. Jonathan sent flowers one Sunday, white lilies. My favorite, with a card that simply said, "I remember everything." I didn't write back. Not out of cruelty, just clarity. Some relationships, like old wallpaper, peel no matter how gently you press them back. Some stories can't be restored, only acknowledged. Beltec moved forward, so did I. I went back to my garden, volunteered at the library again, renewed my passport. I didn't need a title or spotlight. But one afternoon, I walked past a newsstand and saw a headline, "Beltec's founding matriarch quietly reshapes the boardroom." And I smiled. Not because they finally saw me, but because I never needed them to. You see, the moment they labeled me a parasite, they reminded me of something they never understood. Parasites don't survive without a host. But I was never feeding off them. They were living off me. And now? Now they know. It's strange how quickly a reputation can shift when people realize you're not going anywhere. For weeks, I received invitations, not social ones. Not warm, but professional. Panels, foundations, quiet dinners with quiet power. Not because they wanted my company, but because they now remembered I had a vote that counted. I declined most. Not out of spite. Out of choice. After years of giving without being asked, it felt good to choose where my energy went. One morning, I received a call from Beltec's HR head. "We're compiling a company legacy timeline," she said. "We'd like to include you, formally, as a founding contributor." I paused. Madison would never have made that call, which meant someone else had finally spoken my name out loud, in a room that once erased it. "I'll send over some photos," I replied, "and a few notes, but keep it honest, no airbrushing." She chuckled. Understood. I hung up and sat quietly for a long time, holding an old photo in my hands. Jonathan, 6 years old, standing in front of a hand-painted banner that read, "Mom's Garage, Grand Opening." We were selling lemonade and second-hand printers. He was missing a tooth. I was missing sleep. But neither of us was missing purpose. That's what they forget when they strip women like me of our stories. We don't vanish. We adapt. They think silence is surrender. But really, it's where we gather power, until we choose to use it. Later that week, I visited Robert's grave, first time since the letter. The sky was overcast, the kind he liked for reading. I brought a chair and a thermos of black coffee, just like he used to take it. I opened it, I said softly, placing my hand on the stone. "And I used it, just like you knew I would." A bird chirped overhead. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't embarrass anyone. But I made sure they remembered who I was. Who we were. I sat there for an hour, sipping slowly, letting the wind press against my coat. Before I left, I took out one thing I had brought, the name tag from the ceremony. The old parasite. I placed it gently at the base of the headstone. Then I walked away. I didn't need to carry it anymore. 2 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten. No return address. But I recognized the script immediately. Jonathan. It was short, barely 3 paragraphs, no excuses, no defenses. Just this. "Mom, I watched the ceremony footage again, and I saw your face when the camera panned by. I don't know how I missed it the first time. Maybe I didn't want to see it." He ended it with, "You built more than a company. You built me. I forgot that. I won't again. There was no request for forgiveness. And that's what made it real. I folded the letter and placed it in a wooden box by my nightstand. Not to read again, I didn't need to. But to keep. Some wounds don't need salt or stitches. They just need space. I wasn't interested in revenge. What I wanted, and what I took, was recognition without noise. Madison didn't reach out again. That didn't surprise me. Her world doesn't bend easily. But mine doesn't break either. Beltec moved on, stronger in some ways, quieter in others. Elena continued to attend meetings, occasionally sending me notes in the margins of agendas. They hesitated when I mentioned your name today. That's a good sign. She understood the game. Not domination, presence. I spent my mornings differently now. Less chasing, more tending. My hydrangeas came back in full bloom this year. I repainted the kitchen cabinets. I even joined a book club, not because I needed more friends, but because it felt good to sit at a table where no one questioned if I belonged. Legacy, I've learned, isn't loud. It's not a statue or a plaque or a headline. It's your fingerprints on things other people think they built alone. And sometimes, it's choosing not to remind them, but to remember it yourself. The day Beltec's new website launched, someone emailed me the link. There it was, a section called Our Origins. 3 photos. Robert, in front of the first office space. Jonathan, holding the company's first patent. And me, pouring coffee into a thermos, standing by the passenger side of a pickup truck filled with folding tables and poster boards. No caption. No spotlight. Just there. Like I'd always been. There's a difference between leaving and being left out. I'd spent years sitting quietly, thinking I was doing the right thing, stepping aside, letting the younger generation lead. But silence, I've learned, is only graceful when it's respected. And when it's not, then it becomes erasure. But now, I wasn't being erased. I was being remembered. Subtly, slowly, and on my terms. I didn't ask to be the voice in the room. I just made sure the room couldn't function without it. Elena kept me updated in clean, unemotional language. She didn't editorialize. That's what made her so effective. Budget approvals now require full board sign-off. One note read, "Your proxy vote blocked an automatic disbursement for executive perks." Another said, "Jonathan paused the company rebrand after I asked who signed off on removing Bell from the logo." She never wrote my name in those emails. But it was all me. Quiet ripples, measured consequence. At church, someone asked if I was still involved in all that business stuff. I smiled and said, "Not really, just enough to make sure people behave." They laughed. I didn't. It's strange, the more visible I became behind the scenes, the less I felt the need to prove anything. I didn't wear power like a jacket anymore. I wore it like a scent. Faint, but unmistakable. One evening, I sat on the porch, flipping through an old photo album. My fingers brushed across pages filled with snapshots, birthdays, barbecues, blurry images from back when phones didn't take perfect pictures. A life lived around folding chairs and homemade cakes. On the last page was a photo someone else must have added. I don't remember taking it, but there I was, sitting at a shareholder meeting, notebook in hand, glasses low on my nose, watching Madison present a slide. I wasn't smiling, but I was seen. Someone thought that moment mattered. And they were right. That's the thing about staying. Eventually, they can't rewrite the story without including you. And eventually, they stop trying. This morning, a package arrived on my doorstep. No label, just a slim black box, wrapped in ribbon. Inside was a plaque, simple, understated, engraved with just a few words. Margaret Bell, co-founder, silent architect, legacy keeper. There was no note. But there didn't need to be. It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement. And perhaps more importantly, it was an admission that they remembered who kept the lights on when there was no budget. Who cooked for engineers working through the night. Who cleaned floors before guests arrived. That they finally saw the fingerprints. I didn't cry. Instead, I set the plaque on a small shelf near the front hallway, not on the mantel. Not on display, just where I could see it when I walked in and out. Because that's what legacy is. It's not a spotlight. It's a presence. Later that afternoon, I passed by the same reception table from the ceremony. Not literally, of course, but in memory. And this time, I imagined a different name tag. Not, the old parasite. Not, Jonathan's mother. Just, Margaret Bell. And I imagined picking it up, pinning it to my chest, and smiling, not because they gave me permission to belong, but because I never needed it. I always belonged. And the people who tried to make me feel small? They only reminded me of how big I'd always been. So here's the truth. You can remove a name from a speech. You can skip over it in a toast. You can call it a burden, or a relic, or a background detail. But you can't erase a foundation. And when the noise fades, and the room empties, and the applause quiets, it's the foundation that holds everything up. So to every woman who's ever been dismissed, diminished, or decorated with someone else's label, don't wait for them to hand you your name back. Take it. And wear it like the beginning of the story. Because it is. It always was.